A renowned linguist ridiculed a maid's daughter, challenging her to decipher an ancient lost tongue. Little did he know, the silent girl possessed the very key to a mystery no one else could solve. The Meridian Grand Hotel glittered beneath the city lights like a jewel in the night. Inside, chandeliers shimmered over marble floors as guests in tailored suits murmured in polished voices. It was the kind of place where time moved softly, muffled by money and etiquette. But for Lila Navarro, a young maid in a crisp uniform, the evening was another long shift. She moved quietly between tables, carrying trays of tea and polished silver. Behind one of the tall mahogany doors, a group of world-renowned scholars argued over an ancient mystery. Their voices rose and fell like distant thunder, frustration, pride, and desperation mixing in the air. Lila had no reason to pay attention to them, yet fate had already chosen her as part of their story. Inside the grand conference room, 12 scholars surrounded an oval table where a cracked stone tablet rested. Strange symbols ran across its surface, twisting and curling like vines of forgotten thought. This was the Frost Tablet, discovered in the frozen Alluvian mountains, its meaning lost to time. At the head of the table stood Dr. Rowan Finch, the sharp-tongued linguist whose reputation filled entire lecture halls. "It's gibberish," he barked, slamming his notebook shut. "The symbols don't align with any known syntax." Across from him, Professor Eleanor Lane adjusted her glasses. "Maybe logic isn't what they used," she replied calmly. "Perhaps we've been translating their world instead of trying to understand it." Dr. Finch scoffed, unwilling to admit defeat. Then the door creaked open, and a maid entered carrying a tray, Lila, unknowingly walking straight into history. "But before we dive into what happens next, I'd love to know, where are you tuning in from today? Drop your country in the comment below and please like the video. Thank you. Now let's continue." Lila set the tray down gently, but her eyes lingered on the tablet. The symbols felt oddly familiar, stirring something deep in her memory. She whispered under her breath, "That one means snow that remembers." The room froze. Dr. Finch looked up sharply. "What did you just say?" Lila flinched. "I'm sorry, sir. I didn't mean to speak." Professor Lane leaned forward. "No, please tell us. What do you recognize?" Lila hesitated. "My grandfather used to tell me stories in a language like this. He called it the speech of the mountains." Gasps filled the room. Her grandfather, Captain Samuel Navarro, was a missing war hero from the Alluvian expedition decades earlier. Dr. Finch frowned skeptically. "Are you suggesting you can read this?" Lila shook her head. "Not read, remember." And that single word changed everything. Under Professor Lane's patient guidance, Lila began to translate the symbols she recognized. Each line unfolded not as code, but as poetry, phrases woven with emotion, memory, and loss. "We were men who listened to the wind. The mountain remembers our names." The scholars sat in stunned silence. The Frost Tablet wasn't a military cipher. It was a memorial, written by Captain Navarro himself in a language born from friendship between his unit and the native Alluvian people. Tears welled in Professor Lane's eyes. Dr. Finch's pride shattered quietly. All his theories, his prestige, undone by a maid's inherited memory. When Lila finished the translation, she whispered, "He wrote this for the men who never came home." Professor Lane placed a trembling hand on her shoulder. "Then we'll make sure the world hears it." The next morning, the Meridian Hotel transformed. Reporters and scholars gathered for a press conference. The Frost Tablet stood proudly on display, surrounded by cameras and hushed excitement. Mr. Davenport, the hotel owner, beamed with pride. "Tonight, history speaks through a young woman's voice," he declared. Backstage, Lila trembled as her mother, Elena Navarro, fixed her dress collar. "You don't have to do this if you're afraid," her mother said softly. "I'm not," Lila replied. Grandpa wanted his words to live. When her name was called, she stepped out beneath the blinding lights. The crowd fell silent. She began to speak. Gently, clearly. My grandfather never talked much about the war, but he told me that the cold could steal memories. To survive, you had to tell stories. Words were their fire. Every camera turned toward her. Every heart leaned closer. Behind her, the tablet's symbols glowed on a projector screen. One by one, Lila read her grandfather's verses aloud. Each line painted vivid images of courage, love, and grief. Private Daniel Chen, whose laughter warmed the snow. Sergeant Michael Peters, whose shadow guarded the mountain pass. The hall was silent except for her voice. Then she read the next name, Corporal Elias Lane. Professor Eleanor Lane gasped, her own grandfather's name. Lost in the same expedition. Tears streamed down her cheeks. The frost tablet had connected generations through grief and remembrance. When Lila whispered the last line, Samuel who listens to the sparrows, the entire audience stood. The applause that followed was not of celebration but reverence. In that moment, Lila's voice became the bridge between the living and the lost. Within days, Lila's story spread across the world. News outlets called it the Sparrow's Code, the rediscovery of a forgotten language that united history and humanity. Scholars praised her as the girl who gave words to silence. Talk shows, documentaries, and academic papers followed. But fame didn't change her heart. The frost tablet was moved to the National Archives in Washington, D.C. The government established the Samuel Navarro Fellowship for Endangered Languages, naming Lila and Professor Lane as its co-chairs. Dr. Finch, once proud and dismissive, appeared beside them at the inauguration. Miss Navarro reminded us that language is not only science, he said humbly. It's memory. Lila smiled quietly. Her grandfather's promise to bring home their stories had finally been kept. Months later, spring sunlight poured through the archive's tall windows. Lila sat at her desk, her name now engraved on the door. Lila Navarro, Research Fellow. Professor Lane entered, holding a box of declassified military files. They're here, she said, smiling. Together they opened each folder. Letters, field notes, coded reports. Using the rediscovered Illuvian tongue, they decoded what no machine ever could. The snow lion roars on the western pass. It wasn't a riddle. It meant avalanche on Western Ridge. 3 casualties. Requesting aerial rescue. Each file revealed courage frozen in time. Then Lila found a letter written by her grandfather. The people here speak to the wind. If I do not return, let their stories live. She held the paper to her heart. You kept your word, Grandpa, she whispered. The following year, the Navarro Fellowship convened its first international meeting. Experts from every continent filled the boardroom, eager to preserve dying languages and stories. At the head of the table, Lila addressed them with quiet strength. When a language dies, a way of seeing the world disappears with it, she said. Dr. Finch nodded. A dictionary without stories is like bones without flesh. The proposal that day, funding a young linguist's expedition to record the last 2 speakers of a Siberian dialect, was approved unanimously. After the meeting, Professor Lane approached Lila. Your grandfather would be proud, she said. Lila smiled. He already is. He just speaks through the wind. That evening, Lila and her mother walked along the reflecting pool under the city lights. The water shimmered like 1,000 mirrored stars. It's strange, Elena said softly. All this began because you listened. Lila squeezed her hand. He taught me that listening is the beginning of wisdom. They stood silently as a gentle breeze rippled the water. Somewhere far away, in the Illuvian mountains where it all began, the wind carried a faint, melodic whisper. She closed her eyes and said, Sleep well, Grandpa. The mountains remember. And as the night deepened, the sparrows sang in the distance, a song of remembrance, carried by the wind, echoing through generations. Months later, the National Museum unveiled an exhibition titled Voices of the Forgotten. The frost tablet stood at its center, bathed in soft golden light. Visitors listened to Lila's recorded voice reading her grandfather's verses in both languages. Above the entrance, a single quote gleamed in gold letters. To speak is to remember. To listen is to love. And in every language, the mountains still sing. And so, they did, through the girl who once served tea in silence and became the voice of history. If this story touched your heart, take a second to hit that subscribe button. Every click helps us share more powerful stories like this. Stories of courage, hope, and forgotten heroes who deserve to be remembered. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. And don't forget to turn on notifications, because tomorrow's story might be the one that inspires you. Subscribe now, and keep the voices of the past alive with us.